You'll never get ahead in this company if you keep acting like a maid. That's what my boss, Mr. Ethan Cross, said to me the morning everything began to unravel. His words hit like a slap I wasn't prepared for, cold, sharp, and humiliating. All because I had stopped to help an elderly janitor pick up a fallen bucket in the hallway. At the time, I thought it was just another one of Ethan's tone-deaf comments, another reminder of how ruthless he could be. But deep down, something about that moment lodged in my chest, a quiet warning I didn't yet understand. I'm Rachel Porter, 29 years old, senior marketing analyst at Cross and Vale Enterprises, a billion-dollar firm built on reputation, precision, and appearances. Ethan Cross, the CEO, was a man who worshipped power the way others worshipped gods. He dressed like money, spoke like it, and treated anyone below his rank like they were invisible. Still, I admired him once. Maybe even respected him. When I first joined the company 4 years ago, he saw potential in me, or so I thought. He was charming back then, encouraging even. I was fresh out of business school, starry-eyed and determined to prove myself. Ethan became my mentor, guiding me through presentations, introducing me to high-profile clients, and praising my work in front of executives. But over time, that mentorship shifted. His encouragement turned into criticism, his tone colder, his praise rare. It wasn't because my work faltered, it was because I stopped being impressed by his arrogance. I stopped flattering him. And in Ethan's world, that was a quiet rebellion. That morning was supposed to be just another Tuesday. We were preparing for the Ridgeworth Tech merger, a $200 million deal that would double our market reach. The entire office buzzed with tension. I had been up since 4 a.m. perfecting our final pitch deck, while Ethan strolled in late, coffee in hand, acting like the world owed him a standing ovation. He was walking beside me toward the conference room when it happened, the janitor, Mr. Luis, an older man with kind eyes and a permanent limp, dropped his mop bucket. Soapy water spread across the marble floor, and papers from his cart fluttered everywhere. Without a second thought, I knelt to help. Ethan didn't. He stopped, stared at me, then laughed, that smug, rehearsed laugh he used when he wanted everyone to know he was above something. "Rachel," he said, smirking, "you do realize we're presenting to billionaires today, not cleaning up after janitors?" The words hung in the air. A few employees nearby froze, pretending not to hear. I felt the back of my neck burn. Still kneeling, I forced a polite smile. He needed help. It took 10 seconds. Ethan scoffed. "And that's exactly why you'll always stay 10 seconds behind success." He walked off, leaving his reflection shining smugly in the wet marble. Mr. Luis gave me a shy nod. "Thank you, miss." I smiled, trying to ignore the sting of humiliation. "Don't mention it." But deep down, something shifted. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and numbers, but I couldn't shake off that moment. Ethan's words kept echoing in my mind. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that he was just stressed, that his cruelty was a form of pressure he projected onto others. That's what I'd been telling myself for months. Yet, I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way he interrupted me during team discussions. The way he took credit for my ideas in board meetings. The way he never used my name when speaking to clients, just my analyst or my assistant. He wasn't a mentor anymore. He was a parasite feeding on my confidence. And still, I told myself to endure it. Because women like me, ambitious, driven, and not born into privilege, didn't just quit. We survived. We proved ourselves. That evening, as I was packing up, I passed the janitor's closet again. Mr. Luis was inside, humming softly while cleaning his mop. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "You're kind," he said simply. "Most people here don't even look at me." I shrugged, feeling oddly flustered. "That's not right. Everyone deserves respect." He studied me for a moment, as if seeing something I didn't. "Be careful with that heart, miss. This place eats kindness for breakfast." His words lingered long after I left the office. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying the day, Ethan's smirk, the janitor's warning, the uneasy twist in my gut. Something about it all felt like a beginning, though I didn't know of what yet. Ethan had mocked me for helping a janitor, but in doing so, He'd revealed something deeper, the cruelty beneath his polished surface, the rot behind the marble walls of cross and veil. I didn't know it then, but the same man who mocked compassion would soon watch his empire crumble, and I would be the one standing in the ruins, holding the truth that would destroy him. But for now, I just stared at the ceiling, telling myself it was just another bad day. Just another cruel remark from a powerful man. Just business. And yet, somewhere inside me, a quiet voice whispered, "No, Rachel. This is the start of something much bigger." Something changed after that day, something I couldn't quite name, but I felt it every time Ethan looked at me. Maybe it was the way his smile stopped reaching his eyes. Or how his good mornings turned into curt nods. He used to copy me on every major client email. Now I noticed threads I was suddenly left out of. And when I walked into the conference room, conversations sometimes stopped mid-sentence. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that the stress of the Ridgeworth merger was making everyone tense. But deep down, that small, uneasy voice inside me whispered that something was wrong. The following week, we had our first major pre-merger presentation with the Ridgeworth Tech Board. I'd spent days perfecting the proposal, the projections, the market analysis, even the visual layout. When I sent Ethan the final version, he responded with just 2 words, "Good." Print. No feedback, no acknowledgement. Just mechanical approval. During the meeting, I sat 2 chairs away from him, laptop open, ready to answer questions. Ethan stood at the head of the table, perfectly composed, his tone confident, his suit immaculate, a performance he'd mastered. Except, as he began walking through the slides, I realized he was presenting my work. Word for word. Every analysis, every creative pitch, down to the slogan I had crafted in a midnight burst of inspiration. And not once did he mention my name. He said things like, "I proposed this strategy, and my team executed this brilliantly." The board members nodded, impressed. One even said, "Ethan, you've really outdone yourself." I sat there frozen, fingers clenched around my pen, heart hammering. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Maybe he'd mention me at the end. Maybe this was just his way of positioning the team. He didn't. When the meeting ended, Ethan patted my shoulder lightly and said under his breath, "You did fine. Remember, optics matter more than credit." Optics. That word echoed in my head all afternoon. Later that day, as I refilled my coffee, I overheard 2 colleagues whispering by the copier. "She worked on that entire proposal," one said. "I saw her in the office till midnight." "Yeah, but Cross doesn't share credit." "He never does," the other replied. "You either play along or you disappear." My chest tightened. Disappear. That evening, I lingered longer at my desk, pretending to check emails. Ethan was in his glass-walled office, talking animatedly on the phone. His tone was low but intense. Through the reflection on the window, I could see him smiling, that smug, rehearsed grin that usually meant manipulation. Then I heard it, my name. "Rachel?" "Yeah, she's useful," he said, chuckling. "But she's too emotional. Can't trust her with the final numbers." The words hit like a punch. I quietly packed my bag and slipped out before he noticed me. My steps echoed through the nearly empty hallway. I told myself maybe I'd misheard. Maybe he was talking about someone else, maybe no. I knew that tone. I knew his voice when it dripped with superiority. Still, denial is a comforting lie. And I wasn't ready to face the truth yet. The next morning, Ethan called me into his office. His expression was calm, even friendly. "Rachel," he began, "I need you to train Lucas on the client proposal process. He's sharp, fresh from Stanford. He'll be shadowing you." Lucas. The new analyst. Smug, overconfident, and openly flirtatious in a way that made the entire office uncomfortable. "But," I said carefully, "Lucas has only been here 2 weeks. Shouldn't he start with something smaller?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Lucas is a fast learner. Besides, I want to see how you handle collaboration. It's part of your evaluation." Evaluation. Another word that suddenly felt like a weapon. From that point on, Ethan made sure Lucas was in every meeting I attended, interrupting me, talking over me, presenting incomplete work as his own. And every time I tried to correct him, Ethan would subtly shut me down. Rachel, don't be defensive. Rachel, let him finish. Rachel, you're overthinking this. Each comment chipped away at my confidence. I started staying later, working harder, double-checking everything, trying to prove I was still valuable. But the more I did, the more invisible I became. One evening, while printing documents for a client review, I saw Ethan and Lucas leaving his office, laughing about something. Lucas was holding a folder, my folder, the one containing confidential projections for the Ridgeworth deal. Ethan caught my gaze from across the hallway and smiled. Don't worry, Rachel, he said lightly, Lucas is just helping refine your numbers. But the way Lucas smirked told a different story. My instinct screamed that something was off, that my work was being used for something I wasn't aware of. Still, I said nothing. Because confrontation with Ethan Cross never ended well. That night, I ran into Mr. Luis again, mopping near the elevator. You look tired, he said gently. Too much weight for one person. I forced a smile. Just work. He nodded slowly. Be careful. Some people polish the floor so shiny, you don't see the cracks underneath until you fall. His words stuck with me as I rode the elevator down, my reflection staring back, pale, hollow-eyed, uncertain. I told myself Ethan was just under pressure. That maybe I was being paranoid. That once the deal went through, things would settle. But that small, uneasy voice in my gut whispered otherwise. Something was coming. Something I couldn't yet name, but could feel closing in. I used to think betrayal felt like a slap, sudden, sharp, over in seconds. But the truth is, it's quieter. It seeps in slowly, like poison, until one day you realize it's already inside you. And that's exactly how I felt the morning I discovered what Ethan had done. 2 weeks before the Ridgeworth merger, Ethan called for an emergency Saturday meeting. His tone over email was clipped, mandatory. Major revisions needed before board submission. I arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, determined to prove my worth again. But when I stepped into the conference room, something felt off. The screens were already on, slides running my slides. Except my name had been replaced. The new version read, prepared by Lucas H. Reynolds, lead analyst. For a moment, I just stood there, my heart pounding in my ears. I scrolled through the slides, the data, the designs, even the color palette, every piece of it was mine. My late nights, my research, my creative vision, all stripped of my name. Morning, Rachel. Lucas's cheerful voice jolted me. He strolled in, wearing his usual smug grin and holding a cup of expensive coffee like a trophy. He noticed where my eyes were frozen and smirked. Oh, you saw the updates? Ethan thought it'd be better to streamline the presentation, one name for consistency. One name, I repeated, my voice low. Yeah, you know how these things work. He said your input was valuable, of course, he added quickly, pretending to sound sympathetic. But you know, it's about optics. That word again. Optics. Ethan's favorite excuse for cruelty. Before I could respond, Ethan entered the room, perfectly composed, like he hadn't just erased months of my work and my dignity. Good, everyone's here, he said, clapping his hands. We've made a few adjustments to ensure the Ridgeworth team sees a strong, unified front. I forced myself to speak. Why is Lucas listed as lead analyst? Ethan didn't flinch. Because Lucas will be delivering the presentation. You'll be assisting with back-end data. Back-end data? I felt my chest tighten. Ethan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I built this presentation. I handled the projections, the market forecast, the strategy alignment. He cut me off with a cold smile. And you did an excellent job, Rachel. But you're emotionally involved. We need someone who can handle the pressure without overthinking. Emotionally involved. The same coded insult he'd used before, a polite way of saying too human. I looked around the room. The interns stared at their notepads. No one dared to make eye contact. Something in me cracked. I stood up, my voice trembling but clear. This isn't right. You can't take credit for my work. Ethan's expression hardened. Sit down, Rachel. You're out of line. I didn't sit. You used my analysis, my pitch structure, even my tagline. And now you're giving it to him? For optics. For a moment, his facade slipped, a flicker of annoyance. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You want to be taken seriously in this company," he said. "Then learn how the game is played. Nobody cares who did the work, only who owns the room." The words felt like knives. I left before he could say another word. The rest of the weekend was a blur of anger and disbelief. I replayed every moment, every time he'd dismissed me, every time he'd silenced me in meetings. The signs had been there all along. I just didn't want to believe them. By Monday, I'd convinced myself to confront HR, to report what had happened. But when I opened my inbox, a new email sat at the top. Subject: confidential notice, performance review concerns. From HR department, it said my recent attitude and inability to maintain professionalism had raised concerns. There was a note at the bottom, reported by Ethan Cross, CEO. He'd gotten to them first. My hands shook as I read the message. He wasn't just stealing my work, he was building a case to push me out. That afternoon, I saw Ridgeworth Tech CEO touring our office with Ethan and Lucas. They shook hands, laughing, walking past me like I didn't exist. When their eyes met mine, Ethan smiled, that polished, poisonous smile, and I knew. He'd already sealed the deal using my work. My chest felt hollow. I wanted to scream, to expose him right there. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the break room, numb, and found Mr. Luis mopping near the door again. He looked up immediately. "You okay, miss?" I swallowed hard, forcing a brittle smile. Just learning how cruel people can be. He studied me quietly, then said, "Cruel people always think they're untouchable. But pride makes the tallest walls crack." I didn't respond, but his words stayed with me, a seed of something darker, stronger, growing under my grief. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights outside my window. My laptop was still open to the presentation file, my name erased. Shock had turned into silence. Pain into something colder, something focused. I thought of Ethan's words, "Nobody cares who did the work." Maybe he was right. Maybe nobody cared. But I would make them care. He had mocked me for compassion. Stolen from me. Lied about me. Humiliated me in front of everyone. And he thought I'd just walk away quietly. No. If he believed helping a janitor made me weak, he was about to learn how strong kindness and truth could be when pushed too far. That night, I stopped crying. And I started planning. There's a strange stillness that comes after heartbreak, a silence that's not peace, but clarity. That's what I felt the morning after everything fell apart. The anger was gone. The tears had dried. What was left was something sharper, quieter. A voice inside whispering, "No one's coming to save you, Rachel. It's time to save yourself." When I walked into the office that day, I noticed how everyone avoided eye contact. They'd all seen what happened, or at least heard about it. The rumor mill in corporate halls moves faster than any email. Rachel got too emotional. She confronted Ethan in front of the team. She's probably on her way out. Each whisper felt like a small cut, but I didn't bleed anymore. I smiled at them. A calm, deliberate smile. The kind that unsettles people who expect you to crumble. Ethan was in his glass office, laughing with Lucas again, like nothing had happened. When his gaze met mine through the window, he smirked, tapping his watch as if to remind me time's running out. He had no idea that his time was the one ticking away. I buried myself in work, but this time, not for him. For me. I began keeping records, every message, every report, every file that proved my authorship of the Ridgeworth project. I forwarded key emails to my personal drive. I backed up old drafts, with metadata timestamps showing the work was mine long before Lucas touched it. It wasn't revenge yet. It was preparation. One night, as I was printing documents, I found Mr. Luis again, mopping the same marble hallway where it had all started. The scent of lemon cleaner filled the air. He glanced up and smiled faintly. "You're still here this late?" I hesitated before answering. "Seems like the only time I can think clearly." He nodded knowingly. "Hard to think when you're surrounded by noise." We stood in silence for a moment. Then I asked softly, "Luis, do you ever regret being kind to people who don't deserve it?" He leaned on his mop and thought for a moment. No, he said finally. Because kindness isn't for them. It's for me. It keeps me from becoming like them. I nodded slowly. His words sank deep, grounding, humbling. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. When I left the building that night, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt focused. A few days later, Ridgeworth Tech announced their final due diligence phase. Ethan was glowing with confidence. Lucas strutted around like a celebrity. I watched them both, the arrogance, the greed, the way they treated people as props in their success story. That's when the realization hit me like lightning. Ethan's cruelty wasn't personal. It was habitual. He had probably built his entire empire on other people's ideas, taking credit until he believed his own lies. And sooner or later, that kind of empire always collapses. That night, I opened my laptop and began digging deeper. Not into my project, into his. Late nights turned into early mornings. I went through archived deals, past client reports, emails buried in old folders. I noticed inconsistencies, numbers that didn't match, contracts altered at the last minute, names quietly removed from proposal credits. It was all too familiar. Ethan had done this before, many times. He didn't just steal work. He manipulated data. He doctored projections to inflate his image in front of investors. And if Ridgeworth saw the truth, that $200 million deal he was so proud of would burn to ashes. I sat back in my chair, staring at the evidence piling up on my screen. My hands trembled, not with fear this time, but power. For the first time in my career, I felt like I had the upper hand. The next morning, Ethan called me into his office again. Rachel, he said, wearing that practiced tone of authority, I'm reassigning you after the Ridgeworth deal closes. New project, smaller team. It'll give you time to reflect. I met his eyes and smiled slightly. Of course, Ethan. That sounds perfect. He blinked, surprised by my composure. Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. I left his office with my heartbeat steady. Let him think he'd won. Let him mock me, demote me, underestimate me. Because he'd just handed me the one thing I needed most: time. That night, I walked home instead of taking a cab. The city lights shimmered across puddles on the sidewalk. Every sound, the hum of traffic, the chatter of strangers, the rhythmic echo of my heels, felt alive, like the world was reminding me that I wasn't done yet. When I reached my apartment, I opened the window and let the cool air hit my face. I thought about Ethan's words, nobody cares who did the work. He was wrong. People care. Truth cares. And sooner or later, truth finds a voice. I was done being silent. Done being careful. Done being the good employee who bowed her head and swallowed injustice. He had stolen my work. My dignity. My voice. Now, I was going to take them all back and more. The woman who had walked into Cross and Vale a few months ago would have cried herself to sleep. But the woman standing here tonight? She was done crying. She was planning. And she was dangerous now because she had nothing left to lose. They still thought I was broken. That was my greatest advantage. Ethan kept smiling his empty, polished smile and polishing his trophies. Lucas walked around like he'd already been handed the Ridgeworth spotlight. They'd reduce me to a cautionary anecdote in the lunchroom. Don't rock the boat. Perfect. While they celebrated my supposed capitulation, I was quietly building something they could not imagine. Revenge, I told myself, would not be loud. It would be surgical. The first rule was obvious: evidence. Real, traceable, undeniable evidence. Emotion would make a good speech, but facts would make a case. So I started where thieves always get sloppy, the paperwork. I'd already backed up every draft of the Ridgeworth presentation to my personal drive. But copying files wasn't enough. I needed provenance. I dug into server logs, export histories, and metadata timestamps. I spent nights teaching myself to read the language of files, creation dates, last edits, user IDs tied to specific machines. Every little fingerprint was a breadcrumb. Mr. Luis became my unexpected ally. The janitor who had once laughed softly at my clumsiness and warned me about shiny floors now guarded the only corridor no one ever watched. He knew which meeting rooms had cameras, which doors stayed unlocked after hours, and which cleaning carts had ink stains from forgotten pens. He started leaving me small, crucial things: an old hard drive someone had tossed, a discarded USB found beneath a conference table, a cleaning closet with an unlocked network port. "It's messy work," he said one evening, eyes kind but steady. "But sometimes the truth hides where you think no one looks." His hands were calloused, his voice was not. He had no idea how valuable those little finds would be. Next, I built my narrative. Facts without context are cold, facts with context are damning. I compiled emails where Ethan praised my analysis privately, then forwarded drafts to Lucas with edits that changed projections. I matched those edits to phone calls I could prove, conference logs, visitor sign-ins, Ridgeworth's own timestamps from their consultants' visits. Little inconsistencies stacked into a pattern: Ethan using altered figures to impress Ridgeworth, Lucas presenting as lead while Ethan coached him in private, and HR memos preemptively discrediting me. At the same time, I set emotional traps. People like Ethan feed on ego. They crave validation and they overshare. So I became the mirror he wanted, submissive in public, inscrutable in private. I let him underestimate me. I offered small, harmless concessions: a coffee, a quiet nod, and in return I watched. I listened for slips: a careless phone call, a name dropped too casually, a joke that hinted at a back channel. In meetings, I let Lucas take the stage. When he bragged, I made notes. I crafted moments where their arrogance would do the work for me. In the office kitchen, I accidentally left a printout on the counter with a draft email header visible. Lucas took the bait and forwarded it to show off to Ethan. I had set that document to record the recipient and time. Pride clicked a trap I had prepared. I also leaned on relationships outside the building. Ridgeworth's own team had a few sharp analysts, arrogant, yes, but loyal to accuracy. I reached out not as an enemy, but as a concerned professional. I phrased questions as curiosity. "Did you notice the shift from our original projections?" Seemed optimistic. "Wonder how they got those numbers." An internal audit is often sparked by a whisper from a worried partner. I planted those whispers like seeds. All the while I kept my face calm. At my desk, I hummed to a playlist, pretended to check job boards for plausible deniability, and signed up for a weekend course in basic forensic accounting. People saw a woman whose career had been bruised. They didn't see the late-night calls with Ridgeworth associates, the copies of proprietary emails hidden on encrypted folders, or the way I'd learned to read the tiny differences between an original spreadsheet and a doctored version. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The humiliation that had once bent me now sharpened my focus. I wasn't out to ruin lives, at least not wantonly. I wanted accountability. I wanted the truth to stand naked in a room full of suits and polished smiles. I wanted Ethan to feel the weight of what he'd done, not because I enjoyed it, but because the floor he'd built on other people's work had to collapse. There was risk in every move. If I was careless, I'd be the one HR pushed out the door. If I let paranoia win, I'd lose my moral center and become the very thing I despised. So I kept my ethics in the front of my mind. No blackmail, no falsified evidence, no illegal entry. The plan relied on mistakes, their pride, their impatience. Then came the night I found it, a single folder in a locked drawer labeled Ridgeworth Final. Inside were Excel files with two versions of the same forecast. One set matched my original work, the other had subtle but intentional upward tweaks, changed unit costs, inflated market share percentages, shifted revenue recognition dates. Someone had prepared both, intending to present the prettier one if Ridgeworth didn't look too closely. I copied everything to a new drive, encrypted it, and hid the original where only Mr. Luis would know to find it if I were ever stopped. My hands shook, but not with fear. With a quiet, cold clarity. Tomorrow, Ridgeworth would meet with Ethan and Lucas again. He still thought I was defeated. He still thought the optics had been fixed. He still thought his polished lie would pass. It was almost beautiful how blind he was. I closed my laptop and breathed in the lemon-scented air of the hallway that had once felt like a humiliation stage. Mr. Luis gave me a small nod, like a conspirator. I smiled back, the way you smile before a storm arrives, not because you enjoy the chaos, but because you know the storm will cleanse the air. I had gathered the evidence, set the social seeds, and baited the traps. All that was left was to wait, and to let truth do what it always does when set loose among the arrogant. It revealed them. He always believed the loudest voice in the room owned the truth, until the room went silent. The Ridgeworth boardroom was colder than any courtroom I'd ever imagined. Floor-to-ceiling glass, a long table of polished oak, and a wall-sized screen bright enough to drown a man's bravado. Ethan arrived with Lucas in tow, both wearing their practice smiles like armor. Ridgeworth's executives filed in last, crisp suits, clinical expressions, people who smelled deals the way others smelled rain. They didn't know they were about to watch a carefully assembled collapse. I walked in last, envelope in hand. Not the envelope of a woman on the verge of breakdown, the envelope of someone who had planned for this moment down to the stamps that matched server timestamps. Ethan's smile flickered when he saw me. He expected panic, tears, a public plea. He expected optics. Instead, he got calm. I set my laptop on the table, connected to the Ridgeworth system with permission I'd secured days earlier through a polite professional email. Pre-meeting technical check, nothing dramatic. The screen lit up with the original presentation, the one where my name still belonged on the title slide. Beside it, I had a single, succinct folder, forensic report, cross and veil. It was clean, organized, unarguable. "Good morning," I said, voice even. "Before we begin, I have one clarification to offer. These are the projections Ridgeworth received last week. And these are the originals with timestamps and edit histories. The differences are telling." I let that hang. People in suits are curious. Curiosity is the solvent that dissolves arrogance. I clicked. Slide 1, timeline. Slide 2, email exchanges with metadata, my drafts, my sends, the moment Ethan forwarded the dated files to Lucas with a note, Polish and present. Slide 3, the two versions of the forecast side by side, with the altered figures highlighted in red. Silence widened, like a held breath across a room. Ethan's face went still. Lucas shifted as if temperature suddenly dropped. "Who prepared the altered figures?" Ridgeworth's CFO asked, not unkindly, simply precise. I let the forensic trail speak. The altered files were created on Ethan Cross's desktop. The edits match his login timestamps. There are copies in a locked drawer in his office labeled Ridgeworth Final. I can show the export logs, the phone call records confirming a private coaching session the night before the presentation, and the email chain where Lucas acknowledged receiving the final slide deck. I tapped the screen to bring up Lucas's reply. "Got it, preparing to present." The Ridgeworth legal counsel leaned forward. "We ran a cursory scan yesterday and noticed discrepancies. We asked for clarification today. This explains it." Ethan tried to interject, to redirect, to charm. "There's been a misunderstanding," he began. Ridgeworth's CEO held up a hand. "We've been burned before by creative accounting. If these projected numbers were intentionally inflated to secure our investment, that's material misrepresentation." His voice was cold, not accusatory yet, but the arithmetic of corporate trust was already doing its damage. "We will postpone the deal pending an independent audit." The words landed like a gavel. Ethan's practiced smile faltered for the first time. Sweat formed on his upper lip. Lucas looked smaller than his expensive suit allowed. Ethan's attempts to spin the situation unraveled into clipped denials and then into awkward silence as the Ridgeworth team exchanged private messages and tapped their calculators. I did not gloat. I did not shout. I laid out the evidence and answered questions with facts. When Ridgeworth's team asked for the original source files, I handed them the encrypted drive I'd prepared, every draft, every metadata trail, every forwarded email. When they asked for corroboration, I provided the logs showing the visitors who had met with Ethan on the nights the numbers were changed. The room filled with the sterile, efficient noise of professionals turning over a scandal like surgeons examining a fracture. Ethan's last card was desperation. He accused me of manipulation, of planting evidence. Lucas echoed the line rehearsed in the hallway. "Optics, Rachel. Optics." But Ridgeworth's counsel wasn't interested in theater. They were interested in damage control, and damage control is merciless. Within hours, the $200 million term sheet was put on hold. Ridgeworth issued a formal request for a forensic audit. Investors were notified. Shareholders murmured. Emails began to circulate across financial news desks as Ridgeworth's PR drafted cautious statements. The company's CFO made a call. The tone was somber. The illusion had cracked. Across the table, Ethan's empire, the part built on other people's nights and borrowed names, began to crumble. He stood there with the thin face of a man who'd always thought applause equaled integrity. Now, the applause was gone. In its place, a quiet, suffocating scrutiny. After the meeting broke, people filed out in polite clusters. I walked toward the glass wall and watched Ethan's reflection shrink into the corridor. He caught my eye for a moment, no smirk this time, only a fractured look I'd never seen. It was equal parts fear and bewilderment. Outside, Mr. Luis was waiting by the limo drop, his mop tucked behind him like a flag. He gave me a small nod. His eyes had the same steady kindness as always. I handed him a copy of the forensic summary I'd prepared, not because he needed it, but because he'd been the one to find the hidden drive the week before, his fingerprints on the small axe that made all this possible. "Thank you," I said, quietly. Not for his help only, but for reminding me, in those first small moments, why kindness mattered. He smiled, surprisingly bright. "You did right," he said simply. "Some floors need someone to notice the cracks." I let the moment be small and human. I did not celebrate in public. I didn't scream triumph into the suddenly thin air. I listened instead to the soft, final hollowing that happens when a pedestal is removed. Ethan's fall was not loud. It was a surgical reveal, precise and irreversible. When Ridgeworth formally withdrew, citing a lack of trust and the need for a clean slate, the $200 million vanished from Cross and Vale's immediate horizon. The news broke at noon the next day. Stock dipped, partners reconsidered, key clients called for reassurances. The company scrambled. Ethan scheduled damage control interviews. For the first time since I'd met him, he sounded small on the record. I watched the headlines from my apartment window, the city lights steady under a sky that finally felt honest. My phone buzzed with notes of cautious congratulations and veiled warnings. My inbox filled with offers, some mercenary, some genuine. I ignored them all for one message I wanted, a text from Mr. Luis with a single line, "Coffee tomorrow?" I smiled, and for the first time in months I slept that night without planning the next move. Not because the war was over, it wasn't, but because truth had been told with quiet precision, and the man who thought he owned the room had lost the only thing he truly valued, trust. I had not sought to destroy him out of spite. I had sought to restore a balance he'd broken by mocking the small and stealing from the faithful. The revenge was not loud. It was exact. It was, in its own way, merciful. And as dawn washed the city in a new light, I felt not victory so much as relief, a calm before whatever came next. Some debts aren't paid in dollars, they're settled in silence, when the truth finally speaks louder than power. 3 months. That's how long it took for the storm to finish what I had quietly started. Cross and Vale was no longer the shiny empire that once glimmered under Ethan's arrogance. The Ridgeworth deal, the $200 million anchor that was supposed to make him untouchable, had imploded. Investors fled like birds sensing smoke before the fire. News outlets picked up the thread. Whispers of falsified data, internal manipulation, and ethics reviews spread like an oil slick across the industry. Ethan was temporarily suspended pending investigation. Lucas resigned 2 days later, claiming personal reasons. I knew the truth. They'd both been cornered by their own reflections. There's something poetic about watching men who worship mirrors finally see what's looking back at them. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I had moved on quietly, like dawn easing out the night. I took a position at a smaller firm, one where titles didn't define worth, and where the janitors had names, stories, and respect. My first week there, I made sure everyone, from the interns to the maintenance crew, sat at the same break table. It wasn't some grand gesture. It was a quiet promise to myself. Never again would I let hierarchy blind me to humanity. I still remembered the moment Ethan mocked me for helping Mr. Luis, that slight tilt of his smirk, the room's awkward laughter, the sting that followed. Back then, it had felt small, almost silly. But looking back now, it was the truest mirror of his character. The man who mocked kindness eventually lost everything to cruelty of his own making. Mr. Luis still texted sometimes, usually short, thoughtful messages that somehow hit at the heart of things. "Floors are clean again," he wrote once, after the news broke of Ethan's permanent dismissal. "Guess truth does its own mopping." I smiled at that one for days. The poetic justice wasn't in the scandal or the financial loss. It was in the reversal of what mattered. The man who measured success in millions lost his integrity in a single meeting. And the woman he belittled for kindness found her peace in quiet purpose. That was the real victory. The world eventually forgot Ethan Cross's headlines, as it always does. The next scandal came, and the one after that. But in certain circles, his name became a warning whispered to young executives. Don't cross your values for a deal. Irony has a sense of humor when it writes reputations. One evening, I found myself standing again in that same lobby, the marble floors gleaming, the air scented faintly of polished wood and memory. The new CEO of Cross and Vale had requested a consultation. I hesitated before accepting. Not out of bitterness, out of peace. When I arrived, Mr. Luis was there, still working, still humming softly under his breath. He smiled when he saw me. "Told you," he said. "Floors always shine again after the mess is cleaned." "Guess they do," I replied, my voice lighter than I remembered it being. He looked at me for a moment, serious. "You didn't just clean the floor, Miss Rachel. You cleaned the air." And that was the closure I didn't know I needed. Because revenge, when done right, isn't about destroying someone else. It's about removing the weight they left on you. About finally breathing without the stench of injustice. I left the building that day not as the woman Ethan had mocked, but as the woman who had rewritten the ending. I'd stopped letting others define what helping or winning meant. I realized the most dangerous people are not those who lie, it's those who make you doubt your goodness for being kind. That was my lesson. That was my freedom. So, to anyone listening, if you've ever been mocked for doing what's right, or betrayed for being kind, remember this: your decency is not weakness. It's the quiet force that exposes arrogance without lifting a finger. Don't rush your revenge. Let truth gather weight. Let time sharpen your silence. Because when it finally lands, it won't just break your betrayer, it will cleanse you. Ethan lost a $200 million deal that day, but I gained something far rarer: my peace, my voice, my worth. And no deal, no title, no man could ever buy that. The poetic justice? He once said I'd never make it in business because I spent too much time helping people who couldn't help me back. Now, every time I walk into my new office, built on respect, not fear, I remember that line and smile. Because the truth is, helping a janitor didn't cost me a thing. Mocking one cost him everything.